Welcome to the Imagineering Education Podcast. My name is Thomas Riddle, and I'm your host for conversations held at the crossroads of education and design, with a heavy dose of inspiration from Disney's Imagineers. Today, our conversation is going to revolve around stories, and I thought, who better to join us to provide insight into this topic than a fantastic storyteller. So I'm very excited to have with me today Adam Bray, who is the USA Today and Amazon best-selling author of nearly 20 official Star Wars, Marvel, and Lego books. He has also contributed to nearly 40 books on travel in Southeast Asia and has been called a modern-day Indiana Jones by CNN. Wow, that is life goal right there for me. From working with great apes to finding lost temple ruins in Vietnam to riding in a galaxy far, far away, Adam has lived a very adventurous life, and we're excited to have him with us today. So, Adam, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
So, Indiana Jones, huh?
Yeah, it's Indiana Jones. He's been one of my heroes since childhood. I just, like a lot of people, I just really liked the movies, right down back to the first, the original Indiana Jones movie. But my grandfather was also an archaeologist. He had a dig for about 30 years in Israel, and I got to go with him on one of the digs, all at the same spot. But I went on one when I was in college back in the late 90s, so I got to see the real life aspect of that, and that inspired a lot of my adventures and my hobbies, my interests in ancient civilizations when I was living over in Vietnam and Cambodia. So Indy's been an important part of my life.
Wow, that's amazing, and the same for me. As well, Adam. And Indy actually was the impetus into working with Lucasfilm for a bit on the educational uses of the Young Indiana Jones series when it came to DVD. And I taught with Indiana Jones for a number of years in my classroom, my history classroom. World history, ancient history in particular, is one of my passions. Didn't know that about you, so that's fantastic to find out. We have that in common. And of course, how can you not love Indiana Jones if you love teaching and learning about ancient history? So that's cool. I did see that you did live in Vietnam, Cambodia for a while. How did that come about?
Yeah, that was completely unplanned and entirely unexpected. I actually never, growing up, I never had a particular interest in Asia or, even going to visit. There, I was interested in other parts of the world, but it just never piqued my interest. But my brother was teaching English in China. He was very interested in Asia, and I decided, as his term there teaching was ending, he was thinking about coming back to the U.S. At the end. So I thought, well, I might as well go and visit him, because if I don't, I may never go to that part of the world. So I went and I stayed with him for 3 months while he finished up. Just happened to be during the SARS epidemic. So I got to see firsthand from inside the country how China dealt with those things. And as that was the pandemic was wrapping up, about the time he was done teaching, we decided to go from there just to travel around for fun and do some backpacking. So we went on to Thailand, and then he decided to go to Laos, and I went to Cambodia by myself. I actually liked it so much I wanted to stay in Cambodia, but while I was there, they were having elections, and I was a little concerned whether it was safe or not, because in the previous elections they'd had some riots and civil unrest. So I thought, well, while they're doing that, I'll go off to Vietnam and just make sure everything's okay and get a stamp in my passport, and then I'll come back to Cambodia. But I got to Vietnam and I just liked it so much there. I decided to stay, and I was doing web design at the time, and I had kind of gotten into that specifically with the idea that I could do that work from anywhere in the world. So that did allow me to stay there, though after a few years, I came back to the U.S. for a year or two, took some time off, and then went back to Vietnam as a travel writer again, and stayed for several more years.
Wow, that's amazing. I can't imagine backpacking through a foreign country like that by yourself. I could maybe see it in Europe if I understood the language somewhat, but that's such a cool story. And I saw that you've written a lot of travel guides based on, I guess, your experiences there. Was that the first way you got into writing, was doing travel guides?
It was. While I was in Vietnam doing web design for other clients, I decided to make a local tourism site for the area where I was living, because at the time, I was the only full-time foreigner living there, and so I kind of had a corner on the information market, and this was really before social media had taken off. So I could kind of control what sort of publicity this place had and what sort of tourism information made it out of there. So that information caught the attention of travel publishers, while at the same time I was also applying to different publishers to see if I could get an assignment. And it took about a year or two before I actually got of applying before I actually got an assignment to actually write something professionally. So yeah, I got into travel writing from there, and just once I got my first travel guide, it was very easy, to just keep getting them after that. I think my first year, I got three books from three different publishers.
Wow!
And then it just snowballed. I was doing, I guess, I think anywhere from 5 to 7 travel guides in a year, plus writing for media outlets like CNN and National Geographic and BBC and various airlines magazines and the local and regional travel and culture magazines. So I kept quite busy. I was able to do that full time for a number of years before I moved on to licensed publishing to Star Wars and Marvel.
So yeah, that's fantastic. How did you come across this? Again, I'm fascinated because I love Indy. Oh, by the way,
sure,
we got to do this. Which is your favorite Indiana Jones movie? You got to choose one. Desert Island thing,
yeah, right. It's really hard. Really hard. I like them all for different reasons. If I had to only pick one, it would probably be the original, the Ark of the Covenant. Just because that's where it all started. That's the foundation. Probably the Last Crusade is the best one, but I watched that so many times on VHS. It's kind of like I know it by heart, and it took some of the luster out of it. Yes, that's from an objective point, I think that's probably the best movie. But if I had to choose one, it would be the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that one. Raiders of the Lost Ark is, I still remember seeing it in theaters, with my cousin when it first came out. And like you, I love Last Crusade, especially with the addition of Sean Connery. But there's just something about that first time and discovering Indy, and that's just, all the beats are just perfect, and love that. But in that in that movie, he's trekking through the jungle, and he comes across, this idol, and everyone, the guides get scared off and all, and then he continues on in the cave and all, and I hear you mentioning, in your bio about discovering some lost temples yourself. What was that like, and how did that happen?
Right, yeah, sure. Well, I was just going to say that, my memories of seeing the first Indiana Jones were often at my grandparents' house. We'd have a huge extended family movie nights. I think especially on Sunday nights, everybody would go to my grandparents' house, and we would watch movies like Indiana Jones. And I remember my grandfather, as a professional archaeologist, saying, that's not really what archaeology is like. It's a whole lot of studying, and it's a whole lot of tedious work in the hot sun, just sitting in one place, and your back aching and all of that.
And X never marks the spot.
Right, yeah. That said, though, my grandfather, he had some, fun adventures. He was shot at on the way to one summer to one of the digs in and out, because they were digging on the West Bank of Israel, which, of course, that's a hot spot politically. And he would go to other countries too sometimes to visit other sites. He went to Turkey, to Mount Ararat, to the site that's thought to be where the actual Noah's Ark came to rest on top of the mountain. He went to that one time, and he went to various other ones around Israel and Jordan and stuff. So he did some fun things too. It's it's not all boring either for real archaeologists.
Right.
But in my own experience, I never, apart from that, visiting my grandfather's site, I never participated in an actual dig, any others. So my own adventures were amateur, but they were a lot more like Indiana Jones. There was some of that excitement of getting chased by communist police, and
right.
Traveling through the jungle and dodging snakes and scorpions and things, and getting hurt and whatnot. So yeah, as I wrote these guidebooks, I'd have to write a lot of the background information for national monuments and things, around Vietnam and Cambodia and Thailand and Laos. And, as you get to writing these things, you get to learn about those ancient cultures, those ancient kingdoms, and you start to put things together, about their styles of architecture and art. And I didn't know anything about Buddhism or Hinduism, and their gods and goddesses and deities, and how those religions relate to each other. One Buddhism coming out of Hinduism, and how Taoism fits in all that, and Confucianism, and all these things, these belief systems in that part of the world, and how that's affected their archaeology and their politics and everything. And it gets to, anytime you learn something that you don't know, and you really take an interest in it, I've found it becomes interesting by studying it. As long as you've got, some motivation. But, I found that with other things that I studied, botany in college. Whoever would have thought botany was interesting? But the more classes in it I took, the more it was fascinating. So I slowly began to learn about these things. And the primary ancient culture in Vietnam is the Champa Kingdom. And the people are known as Cham. And they controlled most of Vietnam before the ethnic Vietnamese took it over. The ethnic Vietnamese came from southern China and moved southward. But the Cham were part of this Malayo-Polynesian immigration that went to colonize all of the Pacific Ocean. They colonized, Hawaii and the Maori and New Zealand and, all those islands. But right early on, the Cham, at the beginning of this migration, the Cham were one of those groups, and they landed in Vietnam from the sea about 1,500, 2,000 years ago, and started settling, and they're famous for these red brick temples that are all up along the coast. And I would write about these. Unfortunately, most of them along the coast got bombed in the war between Vietnam and the U.S. So most of them are damaged. Some of them are still fairly pristine. But what I discovered is, as my hobbies any day of the week, anytime I had free time, but especially weekends or work between books, I'd hop on my motorbike and I'd just pick a spot on the map, concentrating on my province. But I would go further afield, sometimes up into the mountains or up even the length of the country, sometimes going on a motorbike for 2 or 3 weeks and make a huge loop through the country. But I would pick spots I'd never been to and, wondered, what's it like here? What's it like there? What's it like over there? And it might be a village, or it might be a waterfall, or it might be a dead end up on top of a mountain where I'd run out of gas and have to spend the night and hike down the next morning.
Wow.
But as I started traveling around, I would hear rumors. I would intentionally ask. I would say, are there any, temple ruins or anything nearby? Knowing that there's nothing on the map, there's nothing in the travel guides, there's nothing in the history books. But I would ask the locals and see what they said. And sometimes, a farmer would say, oh, yeah, actually there is something over there in the field. I don't know what it is, but there's, this pile of bricks. Well, you can go look for yourself. So I started finding that there were these ancient, ruins and remnants in the countryside that were completely undocumented. So once I found a couple of those, I got a real taste for it, and I started figuring out patterns of migration that because it's all this Champa kingdom, which was an ancient Hindu kingdom, and I started figuring out that what they did was they landed on the coast and they would colonize up these river systems up into the mountains in central Vietnam. And they would build these ancient temples along the way. They even had whole citadels. I would find remnants, of the city walls. And sometimes you'd even find, a modern village inside of an ancient citadel.
Wow.
And the people there wouldn't really know what the citadel was or who had built it or how old it was or anything. And I'd have to go, look through ancient, not so ancient, but, I'd have to look through like French colonial explorers' journals, or even Marco Polo came through, I learned, and
Wow.
wrote a little bit about the Cham that were there. So I felt like sometimes a little bit like Gandalf in the movie where he's, I think it's, in the ancient library, and he learns about the One Ring, going through all those ancient scrolls. I kind of felt like Gandalf, learning about the histories and things from all these really old writings. But I just kind of figured things out as I went, and I'd figure out likely spots where there could be a temple along river systems. Often I found that the Vietnamese Buddhists, they would build their Buddhist temples on top of the ruins of ancient Cham temples. which is something that happens all over the world.
Right.
One religion will build their temples on top of the one that they conquered. And typically, the Hindus and Buddhists, like a lot of other religions, they'll build their temples on top of high places, on top of hills. And so I'd look for places in the countryside that looked like a likely spot and check them, and often there would be something there. So I'd find these networks along river systems, and it's just fascinating. The more I found, the more I wanted to find, and I did some exploring even over into northern Cambodia, and found a citadel in the jungle there. So yeah, it was just completely fascinating.
I'm amazed. I'm jealous. I'm in awe of that, because those are the kind of things that I would absolutely love to. Those are the kind of adventures I would absolutely have loved to been your short round for. I would have loved to tag along on those. But it's fascinating to hear you talk about speaking with the locals about what are their stories, what are the local stories about this area. Are there anything or are there things here such as ruins or things, and those local traditions are almost always oral traditions, and they're very rarely recorded. And when you can find them and then verify them with archaeological evidence, that's just fantastic. That's a historian's dream, to be able to verify things like that. And when I taught ancient history, I taught ancient history to ninth graders for a long time. And so you're thinking, wow, first of all, ancient history, boring. Then you've got ninth graders at that. And I told them, from day one when they came in, I'd say, hey, how many of you like stories? Anybody see a good movie this summer? And everybody would always raise their hand and what movies they saw, and I'd write them on the board. And then I'd say, okay, great, I haven't seen that one. Thanks for the recommendation. Anybody reading any good books? Fewer hands, unfortunately, than movies, but understandable.
Sure.
And then I'd write those books up there and say, anybody have any favorite TV shows? Just trying to get to know you guys, And so they'd say that, and I'd say, okay, great. So let's look at this. And I'd say, these are kind of categorized here. We can put these movies into like adventure stories, or these are like love stories, or these are like mystery stories. And I said, so bottom line is you guys all like stories. Well, yeah. I said, well, great, because every day you come in here is nothing but story time. And what we're going to do is learn the stories of other people. Because if I go to a dinner party and I don't know who you are, and you don't know who I am, I don't come up to you and just start giving you facts and figures, my social security number, my telephone number, how tall I am, how much I weigh, my birth date, how many, places I've lived in my life. I usually try to get to know someone by asking them, so what's your story? Or
right.
How did you get here? Or who do you know here? Oh, really? Well, I know those. Did you do this? Or have you ever seen this? And then you start to get to know them through their stories. And so,
right.
So I told these kids for years, I'd say, look, we're going to get to know people that you think are nothing like you, people that lived 2,000 plus years ago. And what you're going to find out is that you have more in common with them than you would ever imagine, because their same hopes and dreams and fears, or theirs are the same as yours. And our human stories have just been adapted over time, culture from culture. And so we would, you talk about not knowing anything about Buddhism or Hinduism, and I loved teaching that stuff, and Taoism. We would get to know those cultures through their stories. So we would study their mythology. Right. And I would tell them, look, we're just going to learn about these ancient stories, and you're going to be fascinated because we're going to start by learning about Star Wars. And they're like, what? I said, yeah, next week we watch Star Wars. So the week 2 of your 9th grade, ancient history class, you're watching Star Wars. And but I told them the method of the madness was that you're going to learn about this guy named Joseph Campbell, who had this concept of the monomyth, in which we all tell the same stories throughout time, and the heroes all have the same characteristics. and there's a call to adventure, a dark road of trials, and then a return. And I said, when Lucas crafted Star Wars, he was essentially using that model. And so we're going to learn all of these mythic elements. What is the dark road of trials? Why do people wear masks? Why do villains often wear masks? Why do we wear masks? Why do heroes have partners? Who are hero partners? What are magic talismans? And why does Luke Skywalker have a lightsaber? Why does Frodo have a ring? Why does Harry have a wand? Why does Voldemort have Horcruxes? So you just relate to these ancient civilizations through stories, and it works so incredibly well because it was just essentially we're wired for stories. And so when I hear you talk about learning the culture through learning the stories, I think that is a practical application of exactly everything I taught for years as a high school history teacher.
Sure.
So I love hearing that. So in Imagineering Education, we look at how the Imagineers create immersive experiences in parks that we can then apply to educational experiences. And of course, they create these immersive experiences to teach you as well. I think about when you're describing these things, your adventures in Southeast Asia, I think about Animal Kingdom and all of the beautiful detail that's culturally correct, that's been added, that teaches really when you don't even realize you're learning. So, Disney has a long-standing tradition of immersing us in stories. And I'm just curious, what are your favorite kinds of stories?
Yeah, I think my favorite stories have kind of much remained the same throughout my life. I enjoy the adventure stories. Those adventures can be, scientific. They can be sci-fi, or they can be Star Wars-ish or Star Trek, or they can be fantasy. They can be Lord of the Rings or C.S. Lewis, or they can be more sort of a history based, like in Indiana Jones. But to me it's the adventure. The well-rounded ones are the best ones. The ones that are more lifelike, that have a mix of comedy and humor, with the seriousness, with moral lessons and life lessons and things. So I enjoy a bit of the whimsical and ludicrous too, like a Time Bandit movie, or the Baron von.
Time Bandits, yes.
Oh yeah, Time Bandits is one of my favorites, and all those Terry Gilliam stories, the adventures of Baron
Munchausen.
Munchausen,
Another good one. Great.
Yeah, it's that one especially is kind of, I think, forgotten by pop culture.
Highly underrated, in my opinion.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, the idea of an old guy who's been on incredible adventures, but they sound so ludicrous that nobody believes him. And as he gets further away from them, he ages and is decrepit. But as he's reconnects with those things, it reinvigorates him, and he gets a bit of his youth back. But it's all about the little girl that's watching this through all her eyes, it's just a great story.
Yeah,
and I connect with it very much because I've had all these adventures, incredible adventures, living overseas in other lands, and some of it, to be back in the U.S. now, it just seems so ludicrous, and it seems like I'm on another planet. So I very much connect with the main character in that movie.
That's great. I didn't think about it until just now. That reminds me somewhat of Big Fish with Ewan McGregor.
Yeah.
And you you can't tell, you're hearing his father's stories and you can't tell what's real and what's not. And then you start to discern the truth that lies within each story. And that's fascinating. So what do you think it is, Adam, about stories that really connect with us?
I think we all like to be entertained, and stories feed the imagination. They give us things to reach for and to motivate us in our lives. They can just inspire us to make these journeys through life. To help us set goals, help us see other possibilities, and see opportunities that maybe we hadn't considered as we see hear what the characters go through in these stories. So I think life is really boring, without stories. It helps us. It also helps us to relate, the things that we learn, in our day to day. How those things can be used in practicality and in other ways maybe we hadn't considered. I know in college I used to get frustrated because I was a biology major and I had to take physics and chemistry and calculus and things, especially the mathematics. I never understood, why am I bothering to take these classes? Why am I required? This doesn't really connect with what I want to do with biology. I'm just learning all these things in the abstract, and it's very boring, and it has no application to what I'm pursuing. And I would ask some of the professors were better than others, but I would ask them to explain to me, why do I need to learn this? And some of them would say, it's not my job to relate it to what you're doing. You just have to learn it. So sit down and learn it, and
wow.
You better get a passing grade. And I thought, what an awful teacher.
Right.
But it was the professors that could give me examples of how it relates, but also tell stories with these things. Make it interesting. They help me to apply this to my life. So with stories we can do that, the learning experience in a broader sense. We can use that to help relate what we're teaching and what we ourselves are learning. So it's definitely important in education.
You just kind of summed up very much what's at the core of what we believe with Imagining Education, for sure. And I'm very fortunate to be connected with some amazing math teachers. You were specifically talking about math through my our Twitter PLN, and that professional learning network of math teachers have created some really cool lessons that involve stories that you have to be able to you have to solve the math problems first to be able to advance to the story, and so the story is all about the hook. And what I've found is that students will be more likely to engage in trying to work through the difficulties of learning how to solve these equations if there's some payoff at the end of it. And the payoff is there's a story that's involved. Now, if it was up to me, we'd teach everything with stories, and I know that's not always practical. That's coming from a history teacher,
Sure.
But having served a number of years as a curriculum coordinator in general, and dabbling in a little bit of all the subjects to help teachers create some engaging lessons, there's no reason why stories can't be incorporated into any subject. And like you said, it becomes the hook to kind of propel us forward into wanting to learn more. And so, I also agree with you completely when you're talking about how stories can inspire us to dream, and develop our imaginations. And I think that's so important, especially for young people, to learn to start dreaming early and then not give up on dreams. I think that somewhere along the way, our society, I don't know if it's a Western ideal or what, maybe it's just universal, I can't speak to that, but as we mature, we often begin to set dreaming aside.
Right.
And we get caught up in the everyday of work and making a living and following a career and things like that. But I think dreams are so very important, and stories can often inspire us to dream. I'm 51 right now, and I still am learning to rediscover my own dreams. Dreamed a lot as a kid and had dreams most of my life. So what are my new dreams, and how do we get to those? And I think it's very important for us to still instill dreams in adults as well. So while we talk about teaching teachers how to instill dreams in kids, and stories are a great way to do that, I would be remiss if we didn't stop to say, hey, teachers, don't forget to dream yourself. So
right.
I think that's very important. Did you have any big dreams as a kid?
Yeah, I think, well, one of my big ones was I wanted to become a Disney animator.
Wow.
Because I really like to draw, and I think we've kind of come back around where, Disney is, a seen as an animation, as a primary animation house. That was certainly the way when I was very young, but I think Disney kind of had a period where, their movies weren't necessarily tops for a while. So that was something I always wanted to be when I was a kid. And it's just funny that while I'm not, not animating, I'm not doing a lot of drawing. I still like to draw, but I'm instead of animating for Disney, the last few years I've been writing books for Disney, for Star Wars and Marvel. So in a roundabout way, I've still kind of been doing, basically the same kind of category, or overlapping sphere of things. So it's kind of funny that I've gotten there, but in a different way.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I found life is like that. You don't always, often you don't land on exactly your dream, but you land on a corner of it, or a different way of achieving it. Things. I found everything in life. The steps you take, they all matter, but they don't matter the way that you expect them to. And sometimes we loop-de-loop a bit. We'll do something, and then years and years it won't seem like it mattered, and we'll come back to it, and we might come back to it again several years down the road, and again later. Like, I got a degree in biology, and I worked with chimpanzees right out of college. One place with a lab out in Arizona that had 80 chimpanzees, and then I went on to work at another lab in Atlanta with bonobos, which are pygmy chimps, with the language research program there. And but I only did that for a couple of years, and then I went on to do other things, to do web design and whatnot. And I thought, I'll be done with that, or I must be done with that. I'll probably never get into that again. But lo and behold, a number of years later, when I was in Vietnam, I'm running into primates all the time, monkeys and gibbons and things. And I ended up helping out organizations that rescue animals from wildlife trafficking and stuff. And so I helped out with that, and that was all because of my interest with working with chimps. And then as a travel writer, I ended up getting invited by the government of Rwanda for a press tour
Gotcha.
to see different, tourism sites. And one of the things I saw or went to visit were the mountain gorillas in Rwanda. And so it was kind of funny because that was what got me into working with chimps, as I read, Diane Fossey's Gorillas in the Mist, and then Farley Mowat's Woman in the Mist, biography about Diane Fossey. Of course, Sigourney Weaver's movie about her. So all that fascinated me and got me into chimps to begin with, and here I am years later going to see all this stuff finally. When I got into chimps, it was because I really wanted to go off to Rwanda and work with the gorillas myself. But so I got to do that anyway, and then it was because of my work with animals that helped me land my first Star Wars book. Because it was a kid's book called What Makes a Monster, which is about all the creatures in the Star Wars movies. Just a little kid's book, but it launched my career in writing Star Wars and then Marvel books. So a long way of pointing out that these things we do in life, they come back. They all seem to matter and tie together. So nothing is a waste as long as it's a good edifying endeavor.
Wow, that's beautiful, Adam. I don't know that I can add anything to that whatsoever. Yeah, that is, it's so true. And I think as we go through life, if we will just look for those detours, those off-ramp opportunities, not to be something that has taken us away from our original destination, but perhaps it's just a detour in which we're picking up more information that we'll need or other experiences that we'll need to better prepare us once we get back on the interstate, in the direction we're supposed to go.
Right.
And so that is a beautiful way of saying, really, don't ever give up on your dreams. So let me ask you a quick question about the Star Wars
Sure.
writing. So what's been your favorite Star Wars story writing for Disney around that? I mean, I know you and I are both huge Star Wars fans, and so what's your favorite story about that? So, Adam, I know that you and I are both Star Wars fans, and actually, I think that the first time we ever met was at Star Wars Celebration. I think that was in Anaheim a number of years ago. So, as a Star Wars author, and you've written a number of different books, really a lot of them have to do with like visual guides and things such as that. What's it been like to be a Star Wars fan as a kid and then become an author writing about Star Wars characters? And tell us a little bit about what you exactly write about with Star Wars.
Sure. It's definitely surreal. Like I said, I began with the Star Wars What Makes a Monster. And I guess DK was really pleased with my work because they went right in and offered me the Rebels visual guides after that, which are the guides to the Disney animated series, Star Wars Rebels. And it was to do those books, I had to have an phone interview with John Rinsler, who was the former editorial director at Lucasfilm, who came in during the prequels under George Lucas. And, I told him about my background, the travel guides and writing for CNN and BBC and different ones. And so he approved me. And so I got to write about those shows and right off got to interview Dave Filoni and Simon Kinberg, who was one of the co-producers, but also produces, X-Men and Deadpool, and so I was just scared to death to interview someone of that high profile. But it went very well. He was very generous with his time. And interviewed various ones. And it's a shame because I did several hours of interviews, but they only let me use a couple of quotes from that in the book. So I went on from that, and I've done various encyclopedias and trivia books and fact books for Star Wars. And I've gotten to do Marvel as well. And for the MCU, the Marvel Studios movies, I've actually done the visual dictionary, which is, if you think of the guides that Pablo Hidalgo and others before him have done, where they have the official guide to the movie, that's what this is for Marvel Studios. So it was quite an honor to be able to do that. And as far as I know, I've written several other Marvel Studios books, but as far as I know, I think I'm the only one author that's been privileged to write books, reference books for the Marvel movies, apart from the official art book, where each movie gets an art book. So that's been quite an honor to, at least up until now, to have the corner on that market. That's what I do.
Well, that's really an amazing opportunity. And, for a number of years through my work with Star Wars in the Classroom, we promoted those Star Wars books of yours for self-selected reading. And since they do read like reference books, there's a lot of teaching you can do with using those guides as informational text. And instead of having a kid learn how to read informational text from, say, like a regular history book or science book or something like that, if you're teaching them the same skills, the literacy skills, through reading something that they can relate to, that they're interested in, like Star Wars or Marvel. Wow, we found that to be very successful. And I think most of your Star Wars books, at least the DK books, they'll send them to us to review and promote. And I'll tell you, they're fantastic, and they're great teaching tools. So any teachers that are listening, I can't recommend enough. If you really are looking for a way, one, to provide some self-selected reading opportunities for your classroom library or your school library, so that kids can just, pull something off the shelf that they'd like to read. Or if you're trying to teach informational texts, those visual guides are fantastic ways to do it, or the dictionaries or reference books that Adam's written. So definitely recommend those to any educators or librarians that are out there. So
thank you. Well, if I can build on that, the great thing about the Marvel Studios Visual Dictionary was because these movies are a bit more grounded, which may sound funny, but a bit more grounded in the real world,
right,
than something like Star Wars. So the fun that I had with the Marvel book and the others that I've written, but especially that visual dictionary, is when I'm writing about something like Thor, I did hours and hours and hours of research, because I had to label, and annotate and diagram all these, weapons and costumes and armor and clothing, implements and artifacts and things from all these movies. So something like Thor, I'm doing a lot of research into Norse mythology to name some things after the Norse gods and deities. But I'm researching, what all these pieces of armor and all these, parts of the swords and shields and weapons, what they're called, to get them as accurate as I could. And I do the same, all the World War II, weapons and uniforms and clothing and whatnot, and army supplies. I did all the same kind of research for the Captain America stuff, or for Black Panther. I did my best. But I don't have a background in African studies, but did my best to respectfully research some of the swords and spears and shields and the costumes that they're using, and saw how things would be a blend of different African cultures, and make a note of that. But I do that, in Ant-Man, I did a lot of research about the different kinds of ants that they're portraying in the movie. And so I bring as much of the real world stuff into the books as I could, and supplement and go way beyond what you see in the movies. So there's a lot of actual, real world application and information that you can get in there.
Absolutely. And I'm sitting here listening to that and thinking, wow, that's a whole series of educators' guides we could make for each one of those Marvel movies.
Right.
We've done things like that for Star Wars, where especially around, well, we've done it for all the different films and TV shows, but we had one series called Rebels Connections about Star Wars Rebels, the animated series, at Star Wars in the Classroom, and we were making the connections between Star Wars and real life, and I love drawing those connections, making those historical connections, and showing those parallels, because there's so many of them in Star Wars, and of course it's very easy to see it in Marvel as well, because it is set more or less in our real world. But I'm sitting here thinking, wow, why didn't we ever do a series of educator guides on Captain America or Thor? I love Norse mythology, and because what you're talking about, having to do the research to effectively write these or flesh out these characters, or create the characters or events that happen just off camera, that are so wonderfully are such wonderful parts of those guides. You have to do the real world research, and there's a lot of learning that can take place if you have kids taking part in studying the real world connections to fictional stories, be it Harry Potter, be it Hunger Games, whatever it is. At the Science Center where I work, we have a Harry Potter camp each summer, and there's the science of the wizarding world, and so we have herbology, where they're learning about the properties of different trees and things such as that, because that's how you select your wood for your wand, or potions is actually chemistry labs. And so there's a lot of real world learning that you can inspire with these pop culture connections. And so, I think that your work plays well with that. And so again, any teachers out there looking for some cool connections, you can follow our work and we can show you how to do it, but use Adam's work to get it done. So anyway, so speaking of that, Adam, where can people keep up with your work, with what's you've got going on?
Sure. Well, I'm on social media, so I can be followed on Facebook, Twitter, and now on Instagram as of recently. I believe I'm at author Adam Bray for all three. I do have a website. It's www.adambray.com, and that's ADAMBRAY. It's not as up to date as the social media is, but there's quite a lot there. There's hundreds of links to interviews and whatnot, and a bit about my background and list of books and stuff. So there's plenty there.
And Adam is an author for hire, correct? So if you're
Yes, I am.
If you have any projects and you're listening, and you need a fantastic writer, then you need to make sure that you get in touch with Adam before you go any further. He can hook you up. So Adam,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time today to talk with us a little bit about stories and tell us some of your wonderful stories and to give us some insight into why you think they're so important. I learned a lot today from you, and would really like to have another conversation, have you back for some more talks and get some more insights from a writer's point of view. I know educators are always looking for that. So hopefully you can join us for another episode in the future.
Sure, anytime.
Thank you for joining us for the Imagineering Education Podcast. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, you can discover more of our work at imagineeringedu.com. You can also find us on multiple social platforms at Twitter and Instagram at ImagineeringEd and at Facebook at Imagineering Education. We hope you've enjoyed today's conversation. I hope that you will tune in to our next episode. So until next time, thanks so much for joining, friends. Have a wonderful day. Be blessed.